Henrietta sank into the plush leather of seat 1C and let out a soft sigh. The muted hum of the Boeing 777's engines under her feet felt surprisingly comforting. She'd logged thousands of first-class miles in her life. Today, though, the quiet smile she'd worn slipped when she noticed the sharp, appraising glances from her fellow passengers. She tugged at the cuff of her simple cashmere cardigan, straightening herself. It was early morning at JFK, and the cabin lights cast a wash of pale gold over the rows. A soft chime announced that service was about to begin. Henrietta pulled her reading glasses from her bag and reached for the well-worn leather journal her father had given her decades ago. Inside, she'd scrawled notes on everything from market trends to the clause in his estate plan that would one day make her the majority owner of Horizon Air. But today, reading felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Footsteps clicked on the aisle floor. Henrietta looked up to see the flight attendant. Becky Langley carried herself with military precision in her crisp uniform. Her eyes swept the cabin until they landed on Henrietta. A smile that didn't reach her eyes played at the corner of her lips. "Excuse me, ma'am," Becky said, leaning in just enough to lower her voice. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Henrietta blinked. She lifted her journal, flipped to the embossed page marker, and handed over the pass. "Of course," she said, voice calm. She watched Becky's gloved fingers hold the paper under the scanner light. The attendant's brow furrowed. "Seat 1C, Becky murmured, scanning the code twice. "First class, yes?" She didn't look convinced. Henrietta felt her heart skip. A prickle of confusion and embarrassment flickered through her. She had been here hundreds of times, yet now felt like an imposter. Around her, other passengers shifted in their seats, casting sideways glances. A woman in row 1D cleared her throat, leaning toward her neighbor. "Odd," she murmured. "She doesn't look the part." Henrietta's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she offered Becky the smallest, perfectly measured smile, the one she used in boardroom meetings to mask every emotion. Becky's expression stayed stern. She handed back the boarding pass without a word, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she stepped away, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid, as if the very idea of Henrietta belonged in coach. Henrietta watched her go, surprised by the hollow ache in her chest. Shock, humiliation, a flash of anger. She felt them all in a single heartbeat. Yet she sat perfectly still, journal tucked to her side. If they thought she didn't belong here, she would prove them wrong, but not with words. Her eyes drifted to the window, where dawn was just brushing the skyline. It was time to remind them who she really was. Henrietta rose from the seat without a word. Her hands were steady on the armrests, but her heart pounded in her chest. Becky Langley stood just beyond the line that separated first class from coach, arms folded. The attendant's uniform was immaculate, each crease deliberate. Just the kind of precision Henrietta herself once demanded of her own executives. "Ma'am," Becky repeated, voice low but firm, "please gather your things and move to coach." Henrietta nodded once, deliberately slow, like a queen dismissing a lowly courtier. Around her, other passengers watched in silence, some curious, some indifferent. She bent to retrieve her scarf and small carry-on, a simple black leather bag she'd carried for decades. Her hand slipped around the handles, folding her cardigan and placing it neatly into the bag's side pocket. Though her fingers did not tremble, a tremor of betrayal ran through her. She stood in the aisle, suitcase in one hand, journal in the other, and paused. The cabin lights picked out dust motes floating in the golden glow. In boardrooms, she'd faced hostile investors, dubious regulators, even hostile takeovers, and come through them all. But this, being shunted out of first class, felt like a surreptitious kick at her dignity. Henrietta squared her shoulders. She could feel the weight of every gaze. A businessman in a sharp suit glanced up from his newspaper and cleared his throat, then looked back down as if he'd seen nothing. A young couple shifted uncomfortably. The hum of the engines felt suddenly louder, magnifying her awareness of each footstep. She started toward the curtain that marked the coach section. Becky stepped aside to let her pass, eyes flicking over her like she were a story in progress. Henrietta offered a polite nod. No bitterness, no pleading, just the unwavering gaze of someone who knew her own worth. Once through the curtain, she felt a pinch of cold air, as if the warmth of respect had been left behind in first class. She turned slightly in the narrower aisle, meeting Becky's eyes for a fraction of a second. In that instant, she allowed herself a single thought. They've underestimated me. At seat 35F, she set down her bag and eased into the narrower cushion, pulling her cardigan snug around her. The overhead reading light came on with a soft click. Henrietta placed her journal on her lap, the leather cover warm under her palm. She opened it to a clean page and traced her father's embossed insignia with a fingertip. No apologies, no outburst. She took a slow, measured breath, feeling the muscles in her jaw release. The pang of humiliation still throbbed, but beneath it, something else had ignited. Quiet resolve. They expected her to be cowed. Instead, she was already planning her next move. Outside the window, the skyline of Manhattan receded. Deep in her mind, a plan was taking shape. One that would remind everyone on this plane exactly who she was. And she wouldn't need to raise her voice to do it. Becky Langley moved down the aisle of coach like she owned every square inch of that cabin. Her crisp uniform, navy skirt, pressed white blouse spoke of strict standards and rigid protocol. As Henrietta watched from 35F, she saw Becky flash a practiced smile at a young couple in row 32. Leaning in to ask if they'd like another glass of champagne. Becky's tone was warm, almost conspiratorial, but Henrietta caught the slight curl of her lip whenever she passed less presentable passengers. Becky paused at the next row, row 33, where a middle-aged businessman struggled to fit a briefcase into the overhead bin. Instead of helping, she tapped her foot and murmured, "Sir, you might consider gate-checking that bag." The man flinched, hurriedly lowering it onto his lap. Becky gave him a pitying glance before moving on. Henrietta's gaze followed her, cool and appraising. Becky believed herself the gatekeeper of class, shielding first-class passengers from anyone who didn't fit the mold. The elderly, the casually dressed, the unprepared. It wasn't just rudeness, it was ideology. A belief that social status could be enforced like a dress code. And Becky wore that belief on her sleeve. "Ma'am," Becky said, leaning over to a particularly frazzled mother of three who'd misplaced her boarding pass, "if we can't find it, you'll need to move to the last row." She sounded almost regretful, but her eyes never softened. That same look had sent Henrietta to coach. Henrietta closed her leather journal slowly, the snap of the cover echoing in the hushed cabin. She remembered Becky's exact words, "Mo ba shung kueng thung." It echoed in her mind with renewed clarity. Not an apology, not even an explanation, just a command. Becky's arrogance wasn't born of one bad morning. It was baked into her sense of self-importance. A flight attendant's life was detail-oriented, precise service, impeccable timing. But Becky let protocol become prejudice. Henrietta's pulse quickened, not in anger, but in sharpened purpose. She'd faced hostile boards and skeptical regulators. She'd navigated financial meltdowns and cultural shifts. Yet never had she encountered entitlement on this scale, wielded by someone who believed she had the authority to rewrite reality for anyone she deemed unworthy. Becky straightened and clicked her heels together before turning back to Henrietta, who sat perfectly still, Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Becky's smile flickered. Confusion, perhaps, at seeing her target remain so composed. And Henrietta felt something darken behind her calm exterior, a resolve as solid as steel. Becky moved on, but Henrietta held her gaze on the uniform disappearing down the aisle. This wasn't about a boarding pass. It was about reclaiming respect. And she knew, in that moment, that her plan would force everyone aboard to see Becky Langley and themselves exactly as they were. No more masks, no more whispered judgments. The real test was coming, and Henrietta was ready. Henrietta stepped into the coach cabin and the air seemed to grow colder. Becky Langley had motioned her down the aisle with an imperious flick of her wrist, and now Henrietta found herself surrounded by rows of tan fabric seats and overhead bins perpetually stuffed with carry-ons. The narrow space felt infinitesimal compared to the wide leather throne she'd left behind. As she passed row 32, she heard stifled whispers. A young man leaned toward his companion, nodding in Becky's direction as if to say, "That's the woman." A toddler pointed, his mother shushing him but still stealing a glance. A teenager across the aisle lifted a phone, angling it surreptitiously toward Henrietta's back. It was the kind of attention no one ever welcomed. Becky hovered at the head of the cabin like a sentry. She crossed her arms, posture rigid, eyes cold. "Your seat is 35F, she announced, just loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Henrietta said softly, her voice measured. She could have snapped back, called Becky out on her tone, demanded an explanation. But she remained still. Pride and self-respect ran deeper than indignation. She approached 35F, set her carry-on under the seat in front of her and sank into the cushion. The overhead reading light clicked on with a soft pop. Her journal lay open in her lap, waiting. Around her, the cabin resumed its murmur, the hum of air vents, the rustle of magazines, the low drone of conversation. From the corner of her eye, Henrietta saw Becky step forward to greet a passenger in row 30, an effusive, "Welcome aboard," and a reassuring hand on the customer's shoulder. Then Becky pivoted back to the coach cabin, lips pressed in a thin line, ensuring her authority was acknowledged. Henrietta realized it wasn't about one seat, it was a performance of power. She drew a slow, deliberate breath. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she felt no panic, only the calm before a storm. In just a few moments, she'd remind everyone here that power could shift as easily as a page in her journal. But for now, she stayed quiet, letting the discomfort of the moment settle in the minds of everyone around her. A woman 2 rows back clutched her husband's arm, eyes wide, as if witnessing a scandal in real time. A teenage flight attendant, Becky's subordinate, hovered nearby, uncertain whether to intervene. Neither did. The silence spoke volumes. Henrietta closed her journal, the leather cover whispering shut. In that hushed cabin, she sat upright, shoulders squared, exuding calm authority. No one would mistake her for unworthy, because she knew exactly who she was. And when the time came, she would reclaim her seat, her dignity, and her airline. But for this moment, she embraced the quiet shame and let it fuel the next move in her silent crusade. Henrietta shifted in her seat as a low murmur rippled through the cabin. The overhead vents hissed softly, but the real noise came from the rows around her, snippets of conversation that cut sharper than any blade. She glanced up to see a trio of women 2 rows ahead, their heads bent together as they exchanged glances and smothered giggles. One of them, a sharply dressed matron in her 50s, cleared her throat loudly. "Evie, do you think she even paid for that ticket?" The matron hissed, voice barely above a whisper but somehow loud enough for Henrietta to hear. Probably some charity case or a mistake in the system. Her friends tisked in agreement, their eyes dancing with amusement and judgment. Henrietta's chest tightened. She studied the matron's pearl necklace and designer shawl, symbols of status that Becky Langley so zealously protected. For a moment, Henrietta felt the old sting of humiliation, as if everyone on this plane had conspired to erase her achievements with a simple rumor. But she didn't look up. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, inhaled through her nose, and let the warmth of that breath steady her. Across the aisle, a teenage flight attendant hovered, anxious to step in but clearly torn. The attendant's uncertainty mirrored Henrietta's own. Would anyone stick up for her, or was she truly alone? A small, defiant spark ignited behind Henrietta's eyelids. "So everyone thinks I don't belong," she thought. "Let them watch what happens when you underestimate me." The murmur spread, reaching a retired couple in row 36. The husband shook his head. "That's disgraceful," he said quietly. But he didn't speak up, didn't challenge the gossip. Henrietta felt a surge of sympathy for him, too, for anyone trapped between principle and fear. In that instant, she understood the power of silent consensus, that collective quiet could be just as oppressive as a shout. She ran a finger along the edge of her journal, feeling the embossed insignia beneath her touch. Memories of her father flooded back, evenings spent listening to him argue policy with airline executives, late-night drafts of contingency plans for exactly this kind of scenario. He believed in strategy over spectacle, and Henrietta had absorbed that conviction like a second skin. Henrietta opened her eyes and met the matron's gaze for the briefest moment. No apology, no explanation, just a steady look that spoke of authority earned through decades of building her legacy. The woman's lips parted in surprise, and her friends fell silent, the giggles dying on their tongues. Around her, the cabin seemed a little more still. Henrietta leaned back, folding her journal in her lap. The whisper campaign had confirmed one thing: she would never be silenced. Quiet resistance, she reminded herself, could be the most powerful kind. And the real reckoning, the one that would reshape Horizon Air forever, was just beginning. Henrietta settled deeper into her narrow coach seat, the thin cushion doing little to ease the ache in her hips. But it was nothing compared to the ache in her pride. She closed her eyes and let the drone of the engines carry her back decades, to her father's study in their brownstone on the Upper East Side. He'd been half bent over blueprints then, sketching flight path diagrams with a fountain pen, eyes alight with ambition. "Don't ever let protocol blind you to principle," he'd told her, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses. "If you see injustice, you don't shrink. You plan." Henrietta could still hear the echo of his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her now. He'd built Horizon Air from a handful of roots and 2 aging 727s. She'd watched him fight regulators, hostile takeovers, even union strikes, always with that same calm determination. Night after night, she'd fallen asleep listening to the tap-tap of his pen and the low rumble of his cigar smoke drifting through the room. Opening her eyes, Henrietta felt the full weight of the cabin's indifference pressing down on her. The man across the aisle was scrolling a news app. A toddler tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing at Henrietta's gray hair with childish curiosity. Not one person here would guess she'd once brokered billion-dollar mergers from this very seat. Her world had suddenly become so small. But inside, something else stirred, a quiet, simmering conviction that this moment wasn't the end of her story. It was a turning point. She pressed her journal to her chest, its leather cover warm under her cardigan, and thought of the clause tucked inside. A safeguard her father had insisted on, hidden in plain sight, Clause 7A. In the event of ethical breach toward the named heir, ownership transfers without delay. It had sounded dramatic at the time, an insurance policy for an inheritance she wasn't sure she'd ever need. Now she needed it. She placed a hand on the slim smartphone tucked into her bag's inner pocket. Her fingers flexed, remembering the father who built this airline from scratch, whose final gift to her was the power to protect her reputation and protect herself. The betrayal she'd felt when Becky Langley banished her from first class transformed into resolve. Henrietta drew a slow breath, letting the memory of her father's steady hand guide her. The embarrassment of Coach would fade. The sting was real, but temporary. Beyond shame, she felt the surge of purpose, the meticulous strategy her father had taught her, the same strategy that would turn this humiliating detour into a catalyst for justice. She opened her journal, flipped to the embossed page marker, and with a calm, deliberate motion, wrote 3 words in ink: Operation Phoenix activated. The next move was clear, and Henrietta knew exactly how to execute it. Henrietta slid her leather laptop onto her tray table and slipped her cardigan sleeves back to reveal the embossed family crest on its inner lining. Around her, Coach was settling into mid-flight quiet. Readers buried in novels, earbuds pumping soft music, a handful of passengers dozing. No one would suspect this unassuming 74-year-old was about to upend an entire airline. She flipped open the laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating proud lines at the corners of her eyes. A private Wi-Fi network. Her father had quietly funded the installation of a secure satellite uplink on every Horizon Air jet, popped up in the list. She selected Duval Trust _secure and waited as the signal locked in. A small padlock icon appeared at the bottom of her screen. Encrypted. Henrietta tapped the icon labeled Operation Phoenix. The clause her father insisted be embedded in Horizon's bylaws decades ago. A pop-up confirmed. Confirm execution of Clause 7A. Transfer 75% of Horizon Air common stock to Duval Trust for immediate control. All pending orders will be honored. She paused, chest tight at the gravity of the moment, then clicked, Execute. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a progress bar slid across the screen. 1%, 15%, 42%. Below it, in smaller text, registry update in process. Estimated time, 3 minutes. Henrietta watched those numbers climb as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet. She felt a quiet thrill. This was her turning point. Flight attendant's trolley rattled by, delivering coffee to a passenger 2 rows up. Henrietta took a sip of water, her hand steady. The world around her was oblivious. A father showing cartoons on a tablet to his young son. A woman scrolling through emails. None of them realized the ownership of this plane, and the entire Horizon Air fleet was shifting right now. As the percentage edged toward 75%, Henrietta closed her eyes and pictured her father's study. Late nights, surrounded by stock certificates and flight logs, a man determined to protect his life's work and his daughter's legacy. She'd never doubted his foresight. Now, she was honoring it. When the bar finally turned green, a notification popped up in bold letters. Control transfer complete. 75% of Horizon Air, now under Duval Trust. Henrietta allowed herself a single, satisfied smile. She minimized the window and drafted a brief directive to the executive office. By authority of the new controlling shareholder, effective immediately, all branding assets to begin transition to Duval Air. Interim management team to report directly to Duval Trust. No further seat reassignment without CEO approval. She hit send, then closed the laptop with a soft click. The cabin light reflected off the silver hinge, as if signaling a silent shift in power. Leaning back, Henrietta let the moment wash over her. The indignities of the past 10 minutes, the whispered judgments, the condescending glances, were already fading into memory. They'd underestimated her simply because she sat in coach now. Soon everyone on this plane would know exactly who was in charge. She reached into her bag, took out her journal, and wrote 3 words on a fresh page. Phoenix has risen. The next chapter was about to begin. The alarm bell at Horizon Air's downtown Manhattan headquarters shattered the mid-morning calm like a starting pistol. In the open-plan trading floor, monitors flickered red and flashed urgent headlines. Ownership transfer complete, 75% to Duval Trust. A dozen executives froze mid-conversation. Sarah Nguyen, the head of corporate communications, slammed her hand on the console. "Did you see this?" she barked at the legal team huddled around her desk. A hush fell. The CEO's door swung open, and Richard Hale stormed into the room. Tie loose, face pale, he pointed at the screen. "How could this happen without our sign-off?" On the trading floor, phones rang off the hook. The director of investor relations answered one call. "Yes, I'm aware. No, we don't yet have details. Please hold." He hung up and swore under his breath. In the corner, a compliance officer scrolled through email headers. The subject line read simply, "Execute Clause 7A, sent from an untraceable Duval Trust _secure account." Across the hall, a senior vice president punched in the emergency override code, routing all flight operations channels into lockdown. The intercom crackled. "All staff, emergency board meeting in conference room B at 9:15. Bring your department briefs." As employees hurried past cubicles, murmurs followed them like ghosts. Clause 7A was a contingency for goodwill. It wasn't supposed to be live. How does a 74-year-old board air do this mid-flight? We need damage control. Now. Meanwhile, down in the operations bunker, the director of flight safety drummed his fingers on the console. A live update popped up showing Horizon's entire fleet mid-air, each tail number stamped with a fresh logo, Duval Air. He rubbed his temples. "Contact all captains. Notify them we're under new ownership. No one's to reassign seats or change procedures without HQ clearance." Back on the plane, Henrietta sat in coach, her laptop closed on the tray table. She felt the vibration of her phone buzzing in her bag. A private message from her legal counsel. "Congratulations, Madam Chairman." She tucked the phone away and allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. The murmur in the cabin shifted. A flight attendant whispered something to Becky Langley. Becky's face drained of color as she heard the news over her earpiece. Across the aisle, passengers exchanged confused glances at the overhead monitors, now displaying the new Duval Air emblem and the ticker DVLA. Henrietta looked out the window at the clouds streaked with gold. Inside, she felt the surge of a long-planned justice rippling through both sky and city. The power had changed hands, quietly, irrevocably, and the world was watching. She closed her eyes, savored the moment, and prepared for her next move. Becky Langley's world unraveled the moment her personal comms unit buzzed. She'd been regrouping with her junior crew in the galley, trying to salvage some dignity after sending a passenger to coach, when the device lit up with an urgent message from corporate. Becky's fingers hovered over the screen, her grip tightening so fiercely that her knuckles whitened beneath her perfectly pressed sleeves. She stepped aside into the narrow passage between the galley and first class, heart pounding so loudly she feared the microphone would pick up each beat. The message read simply, "Becky Langley, you are suspended from duty immediately. Please stand down and await further instructions. Duval Air Legal Department." Miranda. "No!" Becky stood, frozen, as if the words had knocked the oxygen from her lungs. The voice in her head echoed, "You removed her from first class. Now step aside." She swallowed hard, mouth dry. "Becky?" Dennis's voice was low, but it cracked with disbelief. He appeared at the galley entrance, concern etched in his features. "What is it?" he asked gently. Becky forced herself to look at him. The color drained from her face, something between shock and shame. She raised a trembling hand, tapping "Read" on the screen. Dennis leaned in, squinting at the text. His eyes widened. "She's the owner," he whispered, tone a mix of awe and pity. "Henrietta Duvall just took control. 75% stake, effective immediately. She's ordering everyone to stand down." Becky's breath caught. "But how?" she managed. Her voice was barely above a whisper, completely unlike the confident command she'd barked just minutes ago. Dennis placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You kicked the boss off her own plane." Heat flushed Becky's cheeks. The galley's bright lights suddenly felt hot and unforgiving. She had always prided herself on maintaining order, on protecting the sanctity of first class. But now the very rules she enforced were being rewritten mid-air by the passengers she demeaned. Behind her, Henrietta watched from her coach seat. She saw Becky's rigid posture slump, her uniform's crisp lines looking suddenly too tight. Henrietta's pulse fluttered with a quiet sense of vindication. No triumphal grin, just a soft tightening of lips. In that moment, she felt the full power of her choice. She'd endured the humiliation, stayed silent, and now held absolute authority. Becky turned away, voice hoarse. I need to inform the team." She stumbled back into first class, passing bewildered colleagues who peered at her with a mixture of pity and fear. Henrietta leaned back in 35F, palms flat on her journal. The cabin's tension buzzed like an electric current. Around her, passengers exchanged stunned looks. Some clutched phones, seeking confirmation. A flight attendant hovered nervously, unsure where to report. And in Henrietta's chest, there was no rush of excitement, only a calm certainty that justice, once set in motion, could not be undone. The cabin lights dimmed for a moment, and then every personal screen in first class and coach flickered to life with a new logo. Duvall Air. The familiar blue and white crest of Horizon Air dissolved into a stylized phoenix rising from the clouds. Gasps rippled through the rows as passengers set down magazines and phones, staring in disbelief. A soft chime sounded, and Captain Harris's calm voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to welcome you aboard Duvall Air. Please note that this aircraft is now under new ownership. We apologize for any confusion, and we thank you for flying with us." Henrietta felt the hum of her heart beat in time with that announcement, but there was no thrill or gloating in her chest. Instead, she sat perfectly upright in coach, shoulders back, the train of her cardigan falling like armor. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, remembering her father's words. Power must be wielded with precision, not spectacle. Then came the soft whoosh of the cabin mic being unmuted. Becky Langley, still dazed in first class, glanced anxiously at her crewmates. A flight attendant leaned toward her headset, whispering, "She's calling." Becky's lips pressed into a thin line. Henrietta rose from 35F with the same measured grace she'd once used to chair board meetings. She stepped through the curtain to the small stage at the front of the coach cabin. No podium, no fanfare, just the hush of anticipation. She tapped the mic once and waited for the static to settle. "Good afternoon," she began, voice steady and clear. "I'm Henrietta Duvall, the new controlling shareholder of what was Horizon Air, now Duvall Air." A ripple of recognition spread. Today, I activated Clause 7A of my father's legacy agreement to protect this airline's integrity and every one of you aboard this flight." She paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Phones pivoted, eyes locked on her, dozens of faces reflecting astonishment, curiosity, even admiration. "Effective immediately," she continued. "Any discrimination, whether by age, appearance, or background, will no longer be tolerated. Our crew is here to serve you, with respect and dignity, and I intend to hold every member of this team and this company to the highest standards." A murmur of applause broke out, tentative at first, then fuller as more passengers recognized the drama of the moment. Becky watched from the galley, arms folded, realizing the power had shifted irreversibly. Henrietta allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. No triumphant grin, just the calm authority of someone who turned injustice into accountability. She tapped the mic one last time. "Thank you for your patience. Now, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of your flight on Duval Air." She stepped back into coach, sliding effortlessly into her seat as the applause settled into quiet approval. In that suspended moment at 35,000 feet, she'd reclaimed her dignity and rewritten the sky's rules for everyone on board. Becky stood at the aisle's edge, hand trembling as she unclipped her silver ID badge and placed it on the seatback tray. No one spoke. Even the engines seemed to hush. 2 security officers approached, nodded curtly, and escorted her down the aisle without a word. Her crisp uniform felt suddenly foreign. As Becky disappeared through the galley curtain, a single passenger, a retired Navy officer, rose and clapped. One by one, others joined in. Polite at first, then wholehearted, the cabin filled with applause, respect rippling toward Henrietta and coach. She offered a small nod of acknowledgement, feeling at once vindicated and profoundly relieved. With a gentle thud, the Horizon Air jet turned onto the taxiway and the seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, gathering bags, but Henrietta remained poised, her silhouette framed by the open cabin door. In the quiet that followed, she rose steadily and walked down the aisle, each step measured. She paused at the doorway, offering a small nod. In the front row, a little boy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "that's the woman who owns the airline now, right?" Around them, respectful smiles and whispered approvals spread, a final echo of triumph and hope.